out there. That arm is unstable. Not sure how long it's gonna hold. There's warning lights everywhere. Abort! Abort! We've lost comm. Look out! Look out! It's out of control! It's out of control!
Good evening, everyone. This is Urox right here. It is now 11:10 p.m. Going on that magical hour, as we call it, the 11 wish hour. Tonight I'm going to cover just a few items in the news that I've seen and been reading on regarding the updates in this conflict, otherwise known as the Third World War, because yeah, that's what they're saying out there. But you know, once again, it also goes back to the history. 11:11, make your wish. And of course, say a prayer to God to help us get through these uncertain times. So let's get on with it right away. I also like to say I've been reading some good books, and while today seems to be a little off regarding how or what we should say and what we should read, right here, as you can see, is a website, Banned and Challenged Books, right? So it's part of a website of the ALA Office for Intellectual Freedom. So definitely you want to go and take a look at this website, Banned and Challenged Classics. Now, even before we go there, I mean, we have to look at some of the books that they are saying is part of the Banned and Challenged ones, because a lot of these books always have some, besides the story, if they're classics, it's because there's some kind of influential doctrine maybe behind it. I don't know. We have to examine that. So, but over here it says the ALA Office for Intellectual Freedom records attempts to remove books from libraries, schools, and universities. These titles are books on the Radcliffe Publishing Course Top 100 Novels of the 20th Century that have been banned or challenged. So yeah, so these are some of the books here. The Great Gatsby, F. Scott Fitzgerald. All right, Catcher in the Rye. Yeah, there've been a few bans on that one. I remember reading Catcher in the Rye. I was in sixth grade, 1980, if I'm correct. And yeah, it was you know, you had to read Catcher in the Rye. Did we read? Oh yeah, we had the Huckleberry Finn, Tom Sawyer. Yeah. Well, you know, we were still hip to it because the '60s was maybe just a decade from after Martin Luther King. So yeah, we were reading Grapes of Wrath, Lord of the Flies. I didn't really like that book too much. To Kill a Mockingbird. Yeah, the first book to say, right? The Color Purple. And you also have to be, look at all the challenging here. Into the works in 1984, Sexual and Social Explicitness and its troubling ideas about race relations, man's relationship to God, African history, and human sexuality. So this was rejected because of, you know, mainly that, but there's a lot of contempt regarding the subject of the film. I remember this is what, 1986 when this film came out, you know, prior to that. And all I could recall, just I was like, what, 17, that whole image, once again, vilifying the man of the household. In this case, it was the black man of the household. And, you know, and now here we are today in 2020, we know something about buck breaking, right? So it's always more layers to it if you want to get deep as to why, at least this one we've seen, the movie version, might not hold up to it anyway. Move on. Ulysses, James Joyce, beloved. Toni Morrison, really? There we are, Lord of the Flies, William Golding, 1984 by George Orwell. I didn't know he was banned. We don't know. He's probably still alive for all we know, you know, if he ever did exist, eh, right? But yeah, only in 1981 though, because the novel is pro-communist and contained explicit sexual matter. Lolita of Mice and Men. Yep. Wow. Catch 22, Brave New World, Animal Farm. But this is just like some of them, right? Gone with the Wind. So this is something to check out. Banned books. Don't want to scroll up too hard for your eyes here. Pardon me. Banned, yeah. Banned and challenged books. So on with the news. One of these interesting readings I've been looking at was also coming from the Negro Question bookstore. So I've been looking here, and yeah, this is kind of, it's not a new trend. These books and a lot of this, a lot of the studies of these books in those days, or let's say like more than 500 years ago, even before the age of so-called enlightenment, a lot of these books give us a lot more of the history that was blurred between the lines. So I've been hearing this brother talk a lot about or teach a lot about Lee Cummings, and he has a whole series of books, right? And verified. So yeah, definitely want to check that out, right? Yeah, author Lee Cummings, the first African American to publish a Hebrew Bible dictionary in the world. Wow, that's pretty powerful. So I'll be getting my book. I know that. And this is at the store. Let's see. We'll go for hardcore or paperback. Yeah, hardcore, The Missing Link. This book was written to show the reader the missing black history of Europe. This book provides that the original kings of Scotland were black kings indeed. This book has eyewitness testimony of Professor Boyd Dawkins, Dr. Albert Churchward, and Benjamin Franklin, to name a few. This book contains genetic and archaeological research that proves the existence of black populations all over Europe. This is going to destroy the government-sponsored education that you've received. Wow, I should put this as a favorite. So yeah, definitely I'm going to check this out. And I've been doing my research also. This, hopefully in our next post, we can take a look at this. I got this on Google Play, The Negro, His Origin, History, and Destiny, containing a reply to The Negro, Beast, Henry Parker Easton, January 1905. So that's the Eastern Publishing Company. Don't let them ever tell you that you can't publish, right? So yeah, so we can look into this, and let's take a little excerpt here. And I always like to look up the people, right? Because even though it's been like, what, 100, 200 years, whatnot, these people had a life before, a history. They come from somewhere. Whether they come from an actual person or a tube is something to be considered. It's been going on for a long time, right? 1905. Biographical introduction. The author of this work was born in Indiana, AD 1851. His education began in Kansas. Let's go a little further. Let's see if we can find some interesting. Because yeah, as far as education is concerned, is not to be measured by any college diploma, since he has, from boyhood to present time, been a hard and faithful student. Hence, his requirements are broader, deeper, higher, and more extensive than any college course would indicate. In all his reading, the author of this work has had one object in view, to wit, to surpass an educator, and his eminent success in this line is patent to all who know him are informed as his work in this direction. As to his work in this direction. All right, so he's the founder of two colleges, the educator of many of our distinguished men. So he's taught also. This is interesting. All right. While not a cultured man, he was possessed of strong common sense, while his mother, Miss Martha Hall, before her marriage, a native of Fayette County, Kentucky, was a woman of extraordinary ability, highly cultured, and to the time of her death, which occurred in her 85th year, her mind was clear and her intellectual powers had lost none of their force and brightness. So, yeah, very strong person. And the preface. The intention of the author in writing this book has been to reveal and demonstrate beyond all question the origin of the Negro, to trace his history from the beginning to the present, and to state what he believes to be the true solution of the race problem. The theory of Ham's being the progenitor of the Negro race is not new, but it had fallen into discredit on account of the authors being unable to find them a Negro wife, which, of course, would have made Ham the only full-blooded Negro, his descendants being amalgamated, and the farther they were from the fountainhead, the less of the Negro blood they would have till in a few generations. All Negro blood would be extinct. Wow. Our theory does not have this error to cripple it, as Ham really had a negress for a wife. Anyone who could lay aside all preconceived opinions and will read with care the first and second chapters of Genesis and remember that the paragraph at the 8th verse of chapter 11 belongs to the 7th, where a recapitulation of its statements of the first chapter ends. We will see that there were two creations of human beings. The first related in the first chapter of Genesis, where from the start they are created in pairs, and the second in the second chapter, where the male alone is created in first. Yeah, okay. So he wants to take it from there. It is unfortunate that so much space had to be given to a refutation of argument made by one Professor Carroll to prove that the Negro is not a human being. But as his book had found extensive sales in the South and had made many disciples to teach to his teachings, right? So people were teaching and as it is as a whole a direct attack upon truth and Christianity, we thought it necessary to remove such error from the minds of its readers before offering them the truth. Well, we have not followed the Negro through all the nations in which he has been enslaved, as his history is much the same in every land. The solution we offer of the race problem is the result of much study in comparison of God's dealings with man in the carrying out of his great purposes and designs. Wow, so it's pretty deep. This is just a little taste of what's going on. But this book is from it's 100 and what, 21 years ago, 22, 23, right? Okay, on with the news. So yeah, definitely we'll get back to that in another blog. Check it out on Google Play. And the Negro question. Very deep, very intense. You can also follow me on Bantu. Yes, there are other great mediums out there where you can at least start to get some of your guerrilla news, right? Because it is, it is warfare time, and you got to get your news, unfortunately, out there as well as inside of where we actually get it normally, right? Inside the establishment. I mean, it's still good, and there is some truth leaking out and coming out, actually, in spite of the history and the timeline of when things happen. For example, like when everyone was ill, right? Now all of a sudden we don't hear anything about it, but could they all be connected? I've been trying to look into that because, like many people out there, many folks out there who went through the whole experience of being down and everything else, remember, this had literally ruined a lot of folks, right? I mean, at least the folks who did get ill, rest their souls, and also the folks that had no choice but to do what they believe is the right thing. And, you know, that I commend those folks who actually had to stand up and, you know, try, to get them, make themselves better. However, we don't hear anything about this stuff anymore, right? And people lost jobs, people couldn't fly, people were isolated. I mean, we don't even know about the mental health outcome of it. So, yeah, I've been checking out other stuff, no disrespect. And hopefully things will make sense, but it's all about ownership and knowing our history. So, yeah, I've been checking out a few folks, and you can come check me out over here on Bantu, in case, right? And Patreon. Now, let's see if we can take a listen here, because this is kind of the theme of our show, and as where we're going, and of course, the theme being cults and gangs and why kids are down with them, right? Because if we look at what's happening today, this is nothing new, right? Everything that's come upon us and been around, it always repeats itself. The whole point is that we have to somehow find a way or find out when this will end, right? This thing of war to end all wars. Now, history is important. And I was listening to this gentleman here, Harley Schlanger and Rainer Fulnick. What are the reasons why Putin went to war with Ukraine? Now, let's take a listen. I don't want to get, how we say, make any violations. So I'm also on Odyssey. If you ever want to come and check me out, definitely come by Odyssey. I'm under your rocks. But let's see if we can just get a few minutes in here. And of course, just before we start, it's always good to do a little copyright fair usage, right? Because, yeah, we just want to make sure that we're doing it. So, fair use. Right, in its most general sense, a fair use is any copying of copyright material done for a limited and transformative purpose, such as to comment upon, criticize, or parody a copyright work. Okay, and oh, we got so many, eh? We just want to, because we do have our Canadian, we do have the differences, but laws have been made for the better of folks, right? Okay. So this is educational purposes only. All right.
Which created for the first time an institutional commitment to the idea of the general welfare of the population. That is, that the people have the responsibility to determine policy. Now, that's what the fight is about today. Who makes the policy? And I want to give a brief historical background to what's happened since probably the beginning of the 20th century. And I mean brief, but to hit some of the highlights to give people a sense of where we are today, because none of this is available to you in the universities or certainly not in the media, in the discussions among heads of state, certainly not in the Congress, which is a ship of fools, in my opinion. So we've been engaged in this, the LaRouche organization, for 40, 50 years, since the late 60s. When Mr. LaRouche identified the emergence of what we call today the green movement or environmentalism. as an attack on science and on the idea of technological progress. And underlying it was what we identify as a Malthusian outlook. By Malthusian, I'm sure many of you people listening know, we're talking about the British philosopher economist who is basically a paid hitman for the British East India Company, who argued that population growth will outstrip the resources to keep people alive, and therefore you have to reduce population to enable the few to have a better life. Now, we've seen this reemerge over and over and over, especially in the period in the 20th century with the eugenics movement and so on. So let me just give you a brief history from our perspective, which I think is highly relevant for the work that you're doing. Now, you start with the end of the 19th century and the creation in the British Empire of this idea of geopolitics, which was essentially that for the British Empire to sustain its control of trade and finances, you could never allow an alliance between Eurasian countries and European countries. In particular, they were threatened by the idea of the Berlin to Baghdad Railroad and the Transcontinental Railroad in the United States as a model for the Trans-Siberian Railroad. The idea of France, Germany, and Russia being unified was a direct threat to the control of the British of trade and finance using the ocean, using sea power as a basis of its power. And in 1904, a man named Mackinder delivered a speech, The Geographical Pivot of History, which laid this out and became the policy of the British Empire to pit France and Russia against Germany, and which was committed to bringing the United States in on the side of France and Russia, and of course the United Kingdom, against Germany. That was the basis of World War I. Now, in the interwar years, you had policy defined by the Treaty of Versailles, which essentially punished Germany, but more importantly, represented the triumph of what I would call corporatist ideology. And there was a specific term that was used in identifying this at that time, which was called synarchy, S-Y-N-A-R-C-Y. Very few people today know this term. It's been written out of history. But if you go back through the records of the intelligence community that was emerging during the Franklin Roosevelt administration, they used this term to describe the use of left and right-wing, supposedly opposition, but nevertheless to divide the population in such a way that the corporate cartels could rule without fear of interruption. It was largely centered at 120 Broadway in the United States. It included the Wall Street banks, the London banks, names such as Harriman, Rockefeller, Morgan, DuPont. And these were people who essentially in the interwar period established the trusts with the Germans, which ultimately put Hitler in power and which carried out the eugenics experiments, which were so dear to these networks. Before the Nazi experiments with eugenics, in fact, before the Nazis came to power, the Center of Eugenics Research was done in the United States, funded especially by the Rockefeller and Harriman interests. And one of the associates of the Harrimans was a man named Prescott Bush, who later became a senator from Connecticut, the father of one president and the grandfather of another. And it was the Harriman-Bush Bank, the Union Bank of New York, which provided funds through Fritz Thyssen that helped Hitler come to power. So this is not just a conspiracy theory. There are documents which now are being hidden, by the way, in the National Archives, which showed that in 1942, after the United States entered the war, the Harriman-Bush Bank was seized under the Trading with the Enemy Act. And those are documents which you can no longer find. But associates of mine, a historian named Anton Chaikin, uncovered them about a decade ago, and they're now available for people to look at. Now, what's the importance of this? Well, the policy of extermination that took place in Germany was not a German idea. It was an idea introduced by this oligarchy, going back to people such as the use of Darwin. And one of the key families in this is the Huxley family. Julian Huxley, in particular, who was involved in setting up UNESCO at the end of World War II, who had an idea that eugenics could be useful for purifying the race, but it was given a bad name by the Nazis. And so he carried out an effort to reform the idea of eugenics so it could be useful in the post-war period. And it was out of this that the emergence of the environmentalist movement in the end of the 50s, funded largely by very wealthy philanthropists like Lawrence Rockefeller or John D. Rockefeller III. In Europe, it was the Club of Rome under Aurelio Peccei. It was the research done at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology by Meadows and Forrester, who proclaimed there are limits to growth. And the whole idea was to use the student movement in the late 60s and early 70s as a marcher force to impose these anti-science and anti-technology policies to reduce.
So I saw this morning, and I was like, okay, one, why should anyone be surprised about all of this? The history's there, but you hear it from this guy here, right? Mr. Slanger, that says, or professor, or I think, is it professor? Let's see. No, he's just the vice president of the Schiller Institute. So we should look that up too in a minute, right? But basically, he's saying, okay, what we already heard and said was conspiracy is pretty much, yeah, true, provided that they didn't hide or destroy the evidence and changing history. So this says a lot, and I wouldn't, if you really want to know more, because I don't want once again infringe on to anybody here, but definitely check this out. This is on the channel Back to Light. Shout out to them. But this is, this is like pretty relevant to what we're being told as the narrative right now, right? Because we're always told, well, it's not what it is. So what are we supposed to do? Keep quiet? I know for a fact right now what's going on in the Middle East and in Africa is getting absolutely no update. Which brings me on to, what's up with our bro, right? Didn't we have a bro, Detroit man, 62, headed to Ukraine. I'm actually going to fight. Yeah, this guy. I wonder how he's doing, right? It's already the 17th. He was supposed to be down there, March 8th? Anyway, he should be there now, right? Because this guy was a pastor then asked God to protect Johnson, 62, who told the group he is on his way to fight alongside their forces, right? I mean, yeah. So, yeah, God give him the strength, that he may survive. Johnson said he was with the Peace Corps response in Ukraine from 2018 to 2019, teaching at Cherkasy National University and Cherkasy State Business College while living in Ukraine. My job was to train university professors in how we bring transparency and democracy in the classroom. Wow. Teaching about government and civic society, Johnson said. After the pandemic began, he taught online at the Ukrainian university. So he was still doing stuff for them. And now he said he's planning to go back to Ukraine and this time be on the front lines with Ukrainians defending their land against Russia's military attacks. So, what we can say is, hey, don't ever say Black people do not believe in doing the better of what the world wants, right? We even have bros who forget about the gang problem and down in out in the States and all this madness, right? This guy, we can put one of our boys to use, and he's going out there, and who knows? I mean, hopefully he can, and we pray he comes back well and healthy through all of this and safe, that he can use some of these skills in the inner city, right? So he took a plane. So he's saying yes, his plans and provided a copy with his flight itinerary. So yeah, definitely. I mean, we will still do always the right thing, even if we still have to maybe research, or maybe it is what it is. Maybe we're just born to do these things, right? And once again, to the brave people. However, what other can we call it reality and not much, even anything near conspiracy? That okay, the word's been out that at least the guys with the AZ, right? We won't even call them by name. You can see for yourself. These guys only want and have selective choice. So they have selective choice, but in order to do this, so this, I guess this guy didn't have to do it because he was already, but if your citizenship is other than Ukraine, but you are standing with Ukraine, yeah, against Russian invasion, you want to actively participate in fighting for your freedom and democracy, if you have combat experience or want to gain its standing with, wow, it's pretty like, yeah, they got, yeah, I mean, it's time to act. If you got to make peace, you got to fight against the enemy. So this is what this is, right? Detailed guidance below, freedom of choice, 7 steps. So you got to have this stuff. So you got to bring a kit, clothing, equipment there. So pretty much basic, right? So this pro is out there, and these are all the other spots that are helping out. Vatican City, eh? I didn't even, it's always kind of interesting that you think like they got like a town out there, but they do. A lot of people don't know that. It's an actual crib, right? And this is the average age of our brave men out there. And I I heard they're women, so brave men, women, everybody, anybody, I guess, who's out there doing. The traffic's not that big though. Yeah. Wow. Well, we have a lot of young people out there who are, you know, that's weird. You would think. Let me see. Hmm. So, according here to what we've seen, like no visitors. Is it because they're already there? I don't know. And yeah, this is a pretty big amount for folks to be visiting, but yeah, this is pretty decent. So our brother, Mr. Johnson, yeah, that's his. Yeah, I thought he was a reverend, but he's not. At least if he was a reverend, like they're not supposed to mess with these. Oh yeah, well no, no, no. That's it. M. Dujon Johnson, right? So he's not a pastor, but he was teaching and training university professors, right? So the rumor has it that these guys just don't take anybody. That's the real download. Like they're from, and I'll have to find that footage because it seems to have disappeared because we're not even hearing what's happening with all the black people and Africans and everyone, the ethno cultures, including the ethno Russians out there and ethno Ukrainians out there that do exist out there, right? We haven't heard anything still in all this time of their conditions. And I hope somebody would shout something out because it's still been like over a week. The last thing we've heard is that, oh, they're like they're probably not getting a chance to eat. So what does that mean, right? So we have to, pray for those folks and pray for those, for our brothers and sisters out there who take it upon themselves to go and fight the good fight. But it's not a good situation to be in, right? Because we lose a lot of folks in all of that, right? So let's hope that, yeah, this guy does his duty and makes it back at his age, right? Despite knowing, yeah, he grew up in, so he's like born in the 50s, right? So probably might have even just been a teenager with Nam and all. So yeah, I'm hearing, yeah, these guys are just like, hey, I don't know if any Muslim fighters are going down there to join, or if they are taking them, or so to be continued, to be continued. And life as a black Ukrainian, how some natives are treated like foreigners. Racism has its unique trend on former Soviet Union soil, according to guest speaker Terrell Starr, who discussed his research as a Fulbright scholar in Ukraine at a May 2011 Kennan Institute event. In particular, Starr focused on the experiences of African Ukrainian women. This was back in 2011. So if you always remember timelines, we're at 2022, right? So it's not that long ago, but it still looks like it's a decade, right? But it's not that long ago. Not that long ago. But this is an article, I guess, to read on. I don't want to get, because the focus of the show also is once again going back to how a lot of what is out there influences our young people, as we see the demographic and the age being 30-some, right? And this is nationwide. Ultimately, the subject matter of Starr's immersion interview discouraged some people from participating in his research. Specifically, the speaker noted that African Ukrainian men would not speak to him as they did not want to share things about their lives that were painful. Thus, Starr's research developed into a study of African Ukrainian women's experiences in Ukraine. Starr focused on the experiences of one interviewee in particular, Angelina Diash, a student of Angolan and Ukrainian descent. Born and raised in Ukraine, the speaker experienced that although Diash viewed other Ukrainians as her fellow citizens, the feeling was not always reciprocated. Although I have a passport that shows I'm Ukrainian, I need a social visa. I didn't know that. Starr recalled her saying. So she developed a sense of self-reliance at an early age to cope with being a minority in her own country. What else is new? Shout out to my Afro-Ukrainians out there, right? But however, also developed a strong sense of self-identity because of her difference. Yeah, you have to. When a person is constantly singled out by race, Starr emphasized you grow to know who you are very quickly. The subject of race in general, as it pertains to Slavic society, is discussed openly and honestly in Ukraine, more so than race is discussed in America, in Starr's opinion. Yeah, well, I'm sure. So you have to really read this article because that's something, once again, I just want to throw it out there. But just before we move on, this is an interesting point. Indeed, Starr's research had a personal impact for him. The speaker, who is of African American descent, explained that he was stopped by Ukrainian police 29 times during his stay in Kiev. Although the presence of racism and xenophobia is increasing in Ukrainian society, Starr asserted that improvement is not unfathomable. However, he noted that effective social change must come from above. What I found in Ukraine, Starr concluded, is that you have to find a combination of political leaders who actually try to deal with the problem. So, wow, that's something to take note on, right? Something definitely to take note on. So once again, let's hope you guys are safe out there. So, and going back to that interview that Harley Schlanger and Rainer Fulmich, if I'm pronouncing their names properly, was a word synarchy or synarism. He said synarchy, right? So I was like, let's look up synarchy, because he said this is what's being practiced now. So it's government politics and diplomacy, joint rule, right? And from the Greek, synarchia, It's like anarchy, right? Synarchy. And synarchie, to rule jointly. So this is English College in 1991. But you haven't seen it. It's kind of hard to find because, like he was saying, they kind of tried to wipe this out. But I searched for it. This information should not be considered complete, up to date, and is not intended to be used in a place of a visit, consultation, or advice of legal, medical, or any other professional. Wow, it's a powerful word. Word in numbers, as they call them. So here we have this version, synarchism. Generally means joint rule or harmonious rule. Beyond this general definition, both synarchism and synarchy have been used to denote rule by a secret elite in Vichy France, Italy, China, Hong Kong, while being used to describe a pro-Catholic theocracy movement in Mexico. Wow. So the origins, the earliest recorded use of the term synarchy is attributed to Thomas Stackhouse, who was an English theologian, controversialist. Okay, so he's into controversy, I guess, right? An English clergyman who used the word in his new history of the Holy Bible from the beginning of the world to the establishment of Christianity, published in 2 folio volumes in 1731. All right, so sovereignty, so Greek stem sin with or together anarchy means rule. Okay, so let's see. This is what I wanted to find out, but just before, he defended social. Okay, so this guy, most substantial early use of the word synarchy comes from the writings of Alexandre Saint-Yves d'Alvidré. Bon, c'est ça. Alexandre Saint-Yves d'Alvidré was a French occultist who adapted the works of Fabre d'Olivet in these dates, and in turn had his ideas adapted by Girard Encausse, alias Opus. His work on La Géométrie deeply influenced young, or might as well go there, deeply influenced René Villon, and he was a French intellectual who remains an influential figure in the domain of metaphysics, having written topics ranging from sacred science and traditional studies to symbolism and initiation. So check out these folks, yo. Anyway, he developed the term synarchy because people can do those guys. They gave butterflies names, right? And that's a whole other episode. But they used to do the Age of Enlightenment, right? The association of everyone with everyone else into political philosophy and his ideas about this type of government proved influential in politics and the occult. So, this is coming from his writings. What he believed was the ideal form of government in reaction to the emergence of anarchists, right? Ideologies, philosophy that is skeptical of authority, rejects all this business, and movements. St. Yves elaborated a political formula which he believed would lead to a harmonious society. He defended social differentiation and hierarchy with collaboration between social classes, transcending conflict between social and economic groups. Synarchy as opposed to anarchy. Specifically, St. Yves envisioned a federal Europe as well as all the states it has integrated with a corporatist government composed of 3 councils, 1 for academia, 1 for the judiciary, and 1 for commerce. The word synarchy is used especially among French and Spanish speakers to describe a shadow government or deep state, a form of government where political power effectively rests with a secret elite, in contrast to an oligarchy, which is a form of power structure in which power rests with a small number of people. These people may or may not be distinguished by 1 or several several characteristics such as nobility, fame, wealth, education, or corporate, religious, political, or military control. So this is food for thought, where the elite is or could be known by the public. So they're all in it together, essentially, right? Doesn't matter if you're oligarchy or you're elite. I think we know who they roll with, right? In France, according to former OSS, which is what became eventually uh, CIA, right? These are old school, was the intelligence agency of the United States during World War II. It was formed as an agency of the Joint Chiefs of Staff to coordinate espionage activities behind enemy lines for all branches of the United States Armed Forces. All right, so you know who they. So this guy, William Langer, served in the Department of Harvard University, was on leave. Yeah, some French industrial and banking interests, even before the war had turned to NZG, Nazi Germany, and had looked to Hitler as the savior of Europe from communism. Hmm. The Paksanak, and they never lived long to finish it, right? Group X like X-Men, was a French technocratic movement created in 1931. You know, the funny thing about technology and all this stuff, this stuff's been around forever. And this is the thing with, we're going to get into the whole pop culture thing, right? With youth and gangs and how they follow these cults and cliques. It's like, you can see for yourself, movements and technocracy existed probably way before we know about the whole, I'm not going to go deep with the Anunnaki thing, but can you imagine if really like what we had today, it's always really been there, right? Because the ability to put things together, it's still going to be there. So even the design might look different, like the shape of a car might look different. The whole engine and the parts to make that car work, maybe the way we're doing it by default because we use the materials, right? Makes it what it is, and we believe, yeah, wow, this is how the car is. But maybe there's, like we see today, there are cars that ran on water, right? There are documentaries out there and clips out there. If you look it up, right, and you have like free electricity, television can be, made with a chip or a battery, right? A car can run on water. Think about that. So anyway, it's very interesting, but technology's been around. So you young folks out there, don't think, oh, because you got TikTok. This stuff has been around like from the 30s. And anyone who's still alive today, let's say who's been around from then, who's been involved in that, who might be 90 years old even, heck, for all we know, maybe even, what's his name there, Jim Crow Joe. These guys knew about this stuff because to make part of their whole plan, they had to have that. Right, just like the movies said, with the brilliant minds, right, and all that business. So, French technocratic movement created in 1931 as a consequence of the 1929 Wall Street stock market crash and the Great Depression. Boom. Formed by former students of École Polytechnique, it advocated planism or economic planning. All right. So, X-Men, X-Crise, Group X-Crise. I have to laugh. The Group X-Crise, they actually get like, the X. May 15th. I bet you if does it correlate with the comic? So it was founded in 1922 with the aim of abolishing parliamentarianism and replacing it with synarchy. This led to the belief that a Kulog, a far-right organization, was the armed branch of French syndicalism. So this is a weird part here. So where's this guy? Most of the presumed synarchists were either associated with the Bank worms or with Group X Crise. They were close to Admiral Francois. I'm trying not to laugh because these people aren't around anymore, and they took themselves seriously. So he was the French admiral, born in quickly advanced to the ranks during World War I. French admiral, right? So Vichy Prime Minister, and this has led to belief by whom? No. That synopsis had engineered the military defeat of France for the profit of bank worms. So who's bank worms? Was a merchant bank founded by Hippolyte Worms. Ah, this looks like a bro. In 1928, as a division of Worms and Company, RC, was a French pulp and paper company. The banking service division provided financing services to other branches of Worms and C Company, which were involved in shipbuilding, shipping, and the coal trade. During World War II, Worms and C was placed under German supervision and was subject to intense scrutiny after the war on suspicion of collaboration. So yeah, and was subject to intense scrutiny after the war on suspicions of collaboration. The Banking Services Division was spun off as the independent Bank Worms and C Company in 1964. The bank was nationalized in 1982 by socialist government François Mitterrand. Remember him? Nah, you kids don't remember him. You kids was just born then. Your parents was just starting to date when this guy was out. You know? Some people, maybe he was a little guy. Some people call him a bankster gangster. Right? François Marie Adrien Maurice Mitterrand. Yeah, he passed away a while ago. 96. Yeah, he was like, yeah, he served for a minute though. 81 and 95, the longest time in office in the history of France as first secretary of the Socialist Party. He was first the left wing and to assume the president. Yeah, he was in, yeah, so this guy, he's elected. Wow, he's like a ghost, eh? You see his face, poof! François Mitterrand, wow, ooh, we have to haunt you. Ah, internet, via the internet. They're probably true. Probably true. You're probably looking at me right now. All right, and you. Look at you again. Ooh, ooh. So the bank engaged in risky real estate investments and lost most of its value after, bam, blow up, show up. And then it was inquired. Wait, this is interesting. And lost most of its value because there are like nuggets, right? Sometimes in the writing you have a lot of good, but then you have to look for the nuggets. It's not being selective or cherry picking. It's trying to get to the truth and the facts, right? Where you can look up the link, another fact. So after being reprivatized, it was owned in turn by two insurance groups, then was acquired by Douche Bank. The bank was wound down in 2004. Probably when we had all that big recession and all those other things going on. So wait, so who's this guy now? If you really want to say so, this black man? Who's this black man? Was he a wicked black man? I don't know. But he don't look, even the name, Creole, ça possible, ça possible. Hippolyte, okay, so Hippolyte Worms, maybe. Worms. 1889 to 1962 was a French businessman who inherited an interest in Worms and C, a major operator in the coal trade and in merchant shipping. He expanded the firm into shipbuilding and merchant banking and found. So how did he do that? Okay, the grandfather of Hippolyte Worms, also called Hippolyte Worms, was from a Jewish merchant family from Sarre-Louis, a town in Saarland, Germany, capital of the district of Sarre-Louis in 2017. Town have a population 35,000. Sarre-Louis as a name implies is okay. Okay, so that's where he's from. He married Sophia Goodshaw, daughter of a banking family from Nobel. In 1848, he started to import coal to Rouen and Dieppe. These are all like war countries, right? Dieppe, and from Cardiff and Newcastle. And by 1851, he was said to be the largest importer of English coal in France. He bought his first ships in 1855 and set up coaling stations, okay? At Port Said and Suez. That would become an effective that would become an effective monopoly on the supply of coal to ships using the canal. So they kept doing this for a minute. His parents were Lucien Worms, son of the first Hippolyte Worms, and Virginie Cook. But even then, let's see. So you don't hear much more yet about that. But he looks like a, I mean, right off the bat, I was like, well, he might, maybe he could have, been very dark skinned, as a lot of people want to say. But after the liberation of France, the principles of Firms and Sea were investigated for possible collaboration with the Germans. Hippolyte Worms and Leroy Ladurie were arrested on 8 September 1944. They were released on 21st of January 1945 and charges dismissed on 25th of October 1946. The inquiries found that Worms and Sea banking services had only played a small and voluntary role in financing for the Germans. So, right, with the excrees. So they're all friends, they all knew each other. And so this led to the belief for this guy, the Vichy prime minister, that Synarchis had engineered the military defeat of France for the profit of these guys. What power they had, there's probably more to look into that. The belief system has been dismissed as a work of paranoid imagination, which wove together the histories of three disparate groups of activists, creating a conspiracy among them where none existed. Most historians affirm that the Pacte Sinac was a hoax created by some French collaborators with Nazi Germany to weaken Darlan and his Vichy technocrats. Technocrats. Like steampunks, right? Because that was around, right? So some people are fine with it, some people deny it. Feudal China, Hong Kong, Mexicans, yeah, they had that. So that's something to look into. Now moving on with the news as we're wrapping up. It's now 12:07 a.m. Almost into that first hour, and we're not going to be very long because I know I've been looking at how I've been making these quick, as we say, date briefs, news briefs, and time is important. And I don't want to waste your time. I want to give a shout out and thank you for tuning in tonight. And right now, the Thursday and Saturday schedule seems to be good, but we're putting this together. I'm just sharing some news out here and letting you know what I've been watching and what I've been reading. I want to give a shout out to all those folks out there who are listening. Please give a thumbs out and subscribe and share. Definitely share if you could. All right. So in the news, continuing from all of that, Russia declassifies footage of a Tsar Bomba, the most powerful nuclear bomb in history. This was back a couple of years ago, though, right? So in 1961, the Soviet Union dropped the most powerful nuclear bomb in history over a remote island north of the Arctic Circle. So the Tsar Bomba. Look this up. Though the bomb detonated nearly 2.5 miles, 4 kilometers above ground, the resulting shockwave stripped the island as bare and flat as a skating rink. Onlookers saw the flash more than 600 miles, 905 kilometers away, and felt its incredible heat within 160 miles, that's 250 kilometers, of ground zero. The bomb's gargantuan mushroom cloud climbed to just below, I like the way they say, just below the edge of space. If any bit more, maybe would have been different. And this was RDS, not like RDS 220. Wow, eh? Sounds familiar? RDS 220, also known as the Tsar Bomba, nearly 60 years after the bomb's record-shattering detonation. No single explosive device has come close to matching its destructive power. So, like in my last post, I was saying they were doing this stuff. It was on the the down low, but on the regular. And those guys out there in Russia, they had that stuff going on. A lot of our people don't even know the history of what went down in the 60s when we nearly got into nuclear war. Right? That was the last great time. The 80s was but nah, they were into Star Wars and it wasn't going that way. When JFK was in and Nikita Khrushchev, told you, it was hot, hot, as they say. It was nearly hot. Because Cuba was involved and they had all these, they had nukes too, which was right down the street from them. So they released this footage, 40 minutes of, I was also saying it also. You know how they always have camera? Camera is always there. Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev personally commissioned the construction. Oh, look at that right there. Right? Commissioned the construction. Now, we don't need all that. I just want to read it. So, yeah. So, personally commissioned the construction of the Tsar Bomba in July 1961. Popular Mechanics, which was I guess it's still around, the magazine, Popular Mechanics, reported. How did they get that? They were the Popular Mechanics, like devices are like Radio Shack, and anyway. While Khrushchev wanted 100 megaton nuclear weapon, engineers ultimately presented him with a 50 megaton version equivalent to 50 million tons, 45 million metric tons of TNT detonated at once. Because at the end of the day, it's TNT, right? It's what it is. Look at that. Madness. But it's TNT detonated. Let's see what the TNT is about. Anything on TNT? A high explosive formed from toluene by substitution of nitro groups for 3 hydrogen atoms. Right? It is relatively insensitive to shock and can be conveniently melted. So this kind of material from the earth they take and they turn it into that. Right? Even with, so that I guess that would be like a lot of pressure, and because if it's that weight, a lot of this stuff is pressured, right? And so thus vaporizing and all of this. Even with half of the premier's requested payload, the bomb was unfathomably powerful. The bomb was thousands of times stronger than the nukes detonated by the United States over Hiroshima and Nagasaki during World War II, and dwarfed the detonation of Castle Bravo, like all these places, the most powerful nuclear weapon ever tested by the United States, which yielded just 50 megatons. So wait, so this was that, and they had what? 45? That's quite a bit. That's quite a bit. So as new footage shows, the Tsar Bomba was enormous, weighing 27 tons, 24 metric tons, and measuring about as long as a double-decker bus. So imagine a double-decker bus. Anyway, now you already know what that is. An aerial bomber carried the massive weapon high over Novaya Zemlya Islands in the Russian Arctic. Then dropped it via parachute before clearing the area. The explosion was so powerful that it actually knocked the aircraft out of the sky, causing the plane to plummet 3,000 feet before the pilot could ride it. No human casualties. I wonder, eh? It's not like, what about the wildlife? Maybe, you got to have some bugs even, right? So in 1963, the United States and the Union of Soviet Socialist Republic, USSR, and the United Kingdom signed the Limited Nuclear Test Ban Treaty. See, so they've been still doing it though. Hasn't been changing. Let's see this Castle Bravo thing real quick. Yeah, Bikini Atoll, I've heard that. Bikini Atoll corals recovering from atomic blast. This was what, 20 years ago? You can say that? 208, 12 years ago. So 50 years after the atomic blast that devastated Bikini Atoll. Bikini Atoll. Why? Is that really the name of this place? Bikini, or did they give it that name? Let me check something. Because I've heard of Bikini Atoll. Last time we were, talking about the part of the relic chain for Sunset Chain within the Marshall Islands. Okay. It's just, because we hear bikini and I'm wondering, well, where did that come from, right? So those are two craters that came from that. Ischscholtz Atoll, sometimes known between the 1800s and 1946. That's very interesting. So the name was changed, I guess, right? Because it was meaning coconut place. Post-Second World War, the atoll's inhabitants were forcibly relocated in 1946, after which the islands and lagoon were the site of 23 nuclear tests by the United States until 1958. Okay, so that's another history to look up, right? But all of that to say that it wasn't the first, and hopefully it's the last. But to go back to what Khrushchev, yeah, this was some really heavy stuff. Thankfully, they said there were no casualties. Let's look a little into who this guy was. Now, this was Khrushchev. He was the man doing what, considered what Putin is today, but it was a whole different government, right? So Nikita Sergeyevich Khrushchev, wow, you got that one. 1894 to 1971, was the first secretary of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union from 1953 to 1964, and chairman of that country's Council of Ministers from 1958 to 1964. So this was up until 1991, right? So that's just before the wall came down. The Council of Ministers of the Union of Soviet Socialist Republic, USSR, right, was the de jure government of the Union, USSR, comprising the main executive and administrative agency of the USSR from 1946 until 1991. Right? So he was part of that from 53, 64, chairman of that country's minister from 58. So during his rule, Khrushchev stunned the communist world with his denunciation of Stalin's crimes, right? And embarked on the policy of de-Stalinization, consisted of a series of political reforms in the Soviet Union after the death of longtime leader Joseph Stalin in 1953, and the ascension of Nikita Khrushchev to power. The reforms consisted of changing or removing key institutions that helped Stalin hold power, the cult of personality that surrounded him, and the Stalinist political system, both of which had been created by Stalin. So, right, let's get back. So fast forward in 1964, the Kremlin leadership stripped him of power, replacing him with Leonid Brezhnev. He was another one, right? Right? Some of you might remember him, but he was like, he led the USSR of the governing party 1964 to 1982, right? That was a minute after. And as chairman of the Presidium of the Supreme Soviet, second. All right, so he got into that, and when he came in the in the game. He sponsored the early Soviet space program. So if they went to space and the Soviets get involved, he was down with the program along with the United, thus the Cold War versus the guys in NASA, right? Enactment of relatively liberal reforms in the domestic policy. So this all happened after the war, right? And then they knocked out Stalin, and then whoops, after some false starts and a narrowly avoided nuclear Cold War over Cuba, he conducted successful negotiations with the United States to reduce Cold War tensions. And then in 1964, the Kremlin leadership stripped him of power, replacing him with Leonid Brezhnev, this guy, as first secretary, right? So that's old school. And Brezhnev, when he got in, well, after that. So this is what went down with the Cuban Missile Crisis. And I don't want to get too long on it, but just the background. So the Cuban Missile Crisis, also known as October Crisis of 1962, or the Missile Scare, was a 1-month, 4-day, October 16th to November 20th, 1962. Note what happened 1 year later, right? On the confrontation between the United States and the Soviet Union, which escalated into an international crisis when American deployments of missiles in Italy and Turkey were matched by Soviet deployments of similar ballistic missiles in Cuba. Despite the short time frame, the Cuban Missile Crisis remains a defining moment in U.S. national security and nuclear war preparation. Confrontation is often considered the closest the Cold War came to escalating into full-scale nuclear war. So yeah, this was very. There's a document that shows how tight it was, because I know when you read the history, they always say it was very close. Okay, so U.S. alert revised. So, raising the stakes on the morning of October 26, Kennedy informed the ex-com that he believed only an invasion would remove the missiles from Cuba. He was persuaded to give the matter time and continue with both military and diplomatic pressure. He agreed and ordered the low-level flights over the island to be increased from 2 per day to once every 2 hours. Okay. A crash program to institute a new civil government in Cuba if an invasion went ahead. So that evening at 1 p.m., war seems about to break out. I just want to get to the point where that minute was. Or was it ever resolved? But this is what, I mean, since this is out there digitally, I want to, you think, okay, let's see. Okay, secret negotiations. It would be in this section. At 1 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time on October 26, John A. Scali was the United States ambassador to the United States from 73-75. From 61, he was also a longtime correspondent for the news. I always like how these guys get involved in politics, If you want to get involved in politics, be a reporter. Or an actor. Had lunch with Alexander Foreman. The cover name of Alexander Felisov was a Soviet spy and KGB station chief, resident spy in the world of espionage, or the James Bond thing, right? In Washington at Foreman's request. Following the instructions of the Politburo of the CPSU, so that's the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, highest policy-making authority within the Communist Party, right? Foreman noted war seems about to break out. He asked Scally to use his contacts, all right, his high-level friends at the State Department, to see if the U.S. would be interested in diplomatic solution. He suggested that the language of the deal would contain an assurance from the Soviet Public Union to remove the weapons under UN supervision, and that Castro would publicly announce that he would not accept such weapons again in exchange for a public statement by the US that it would not invade Cuba. The US responded by asking the Brazilian government to pass a message to Castro that the US would be unlikely to invade if missiles were removed. So on the 26th at 6 p.m., the State Department started receiving a message that appeared to be written personally by Khrushchev. It was Saturday, 2 a.m. in Moscow. The long letter took several minutes to arrive, and it took translators an additional time to translate and transcribe it. So Robert F. Kennedy described the letter as very long and emotional. Khrushchev reiterated the basic outline that had been stated to Scally earlier that in the day. I propose we, for our part, can declare that our ships bound for Cuba are not carrying any armaments. You will declare that the United States will not invade Cuba with its troops and will not support any other forces which might intend to invade Cuba. Then the necessity of the presence of our military specialists in Cuba will disappear. Right? And the crisis continues. So this went on with Che Guevara. I have no doubt they would lose such a war. So anyway, this was very close just to get to the point because I don't want to really scroll as we're all learning together. Okay, let's see. The averted, okay, so the crisis ended right after this. Later, okay, averted nuclear launch later the same day. White Sox called it Black Sunday. The U.S. Navy dropped a series of signaling depth charges, craft depth charges the size of hand grenades, on a Soviet submarine, B-59 at a blockade line. Unaware that it was armed with a nuclear-tipped torpedo with orders that allowed it to be used if the submarine was damaged by the depth charges or surface fire, as the submarine was too deep to monitor any radio traffic, the captain of the B-59, this guy, decided that a war might already have started and wanted to launch a nuclear torpedo. The decision to launch these normally only required agreement from the two commanding officers on board and political officer. So that's the captain and pilot. However, the commander of the submarine flotilla, this guy, credited with preventing a Soviet nuclear strike, was aboard, and he also had to agree. Arkhipov objected, so the nuclear launch was narrowly averted. On the same day, a U.S. spy plane made an accidental, unauthorized 90-minute overflight over the Soviet Union Far East coast. Soviets responded by scrambling MiG fighters from Wrangel Island. In turn, the Americans launched F-12 fighters armed with nuclear air-to-air missiles over the Bering Sea. And then after that, they agreed to remove all missiles. So at the end of that, going all the way into the 80s and then testing our bombs, it was really just a show of who had the bigger missile at the end of it. Right? And there's so much more information if you want to take the time, but it was close. And nobody wants to admit who stopped when. I'm sure, out in the West, they'd say, well, we won that, right? So that's Nikita and that whole scene with how close we come to it. And, all this stuff creates moral panic, a widespread feeling of fear, right? Moral panic. And Stanley Cohen, who developed the term, he was a sociologist, criminologist, professor of sociology, London School of Economics, known for breaking academic ground on emotional management. Right? So moral panic can be created and also unconsciously be part of everyday life, usually perpetrated by moral entrepreneurs and the mass media. So let's take this. So moral panic is a widespread feeling of fear, often an irrational one, that some evil person or thing threatens the values, interests, or well-being of a community or society. It is the process of arousing social concern over an issue, usually perpetrated by moral entrepreneurs and the mass media, and exacerbated by politicians and lawmakers. Boom. Wow. But some examples of it include the belief in widespread abduction of children by predatory folks, ritual abuse of women and children by satanic cults. Some moral panics can become embedded in standard political discourse, which include concepts such as Red Scare and terrorism. Okay. So with that, and these things that are designed like that, it's easy to see how a lot of subcultures and how kids today, it's not, well, 31 a.m., 2022, March 18th. The list of subcultures. So a lot of this is by design also, right? Going all the way back to even what this guy was saying here. He was saying like how these folks like to design and take over in a way based on synarchy and bringing it together and saying, we can conspire together to do something. Whether it's immoral or whether it's moral, we can still call that shot. And it could be right, middle, left. So over here, a lot of these subcultures and cultures here and influences, I'm sure happened when kids, especially when they're young, softened minds and our media and what's being put out in the news. It's going to take some fight back from some people outside the folks that always call the narrative. It doesn't have to be always like, a lot of folks go out there and march. You notice they haven't been, apart from the trucker thing that happened, there ain't no march outside, eh? We don't even know how people are going to even get ready for parades, right? Happy St. Patty's actually coming up, but, it's something to think about here. So we thrive because of this inherent need to belong. So this is an article here. Why you buy into the pop culture and joining a cult is basically the same as, it's basically the same thing. And even when we see all of this business going on, even now we see what's going on in Europe and this effort, life still has to go on, right? Even though a lot of the social structure has been damaged, I would say definitely it's not the same. It hasn't been the same since the last 2 years, right? So we do depend on a lot of what we see in TikTok and all of this stuff and a lot of influencers. Like this guy here, this article, fires were raging through through Australia. Hurricanes are ripping up the Bahamas. Parts of Puerto Rico still lack power and running water after Maria and the coronavirus. At that time, yet as I write this, McD's Quarter Pounder is the #1 trending topic on Twitter. So there is always that, and technology, like technocracy, that's what's going on right now, right? It's kind of a similar trope that's going on with this whole, with what we're seeing in the news for nearly a month now. Let's see what happens before August, or let's say even April. You can't tell, right? But you could always get ready for when the next switch is going to happen. So this article is pretty good, So once again, it always goes back to these folks, right? When French political scientist Alexis de Tocqueville visited the United States in 1830s. He was most impressed by the fact that Americans of all ages, all stations in life, and all types of disposition were forever forming associations. This penchant for creating clubs and organizations addressed both social and societal needs. What began as Women's Club in the Gilded Age laid the groundwork for the suffrage movement in the early 20th century. So definitely it does start in our history, and even biblically, when you hear about the different tribes, with the 12 tribes, right? They each had their own culture. They each created something, right? And the way they dress, whether, so as we become more lonely and isolated. This is a very interesting point because since after the pandemic, you can imagine the families that were broken up and all that. That alone, some folks would say, is because of the cultism that some people are taking on how they were told or how the narrative was told to them, right? The modern day campfire became a way for us to manufacture belonging in an increasingly imperial, ephemeral world, to keep ourselves engaged through social lives built around entertainment rather than relationships. Right? So this is one article that talks about that, and it also goes into, and this was last year, national politics have evolved and perhaps regressed into reality television. Remember? There was a minute where folks were like, hey, this guy did reality television. That was like, well, not even like a decade almost, right? Transforming us into fiercely loyal super fans. Church has become cool through Instagram friendly facades and an intentional de-emphasis of religion, helped by rappers. And so it's always unified us, whether it be through radio programs, music. They call it the soundtrack of our lives. And here we are. We don't have no soundtrack because right now we're in this kind of POW situation, this social prisoner of war situation where it's real, right? But how real is it? Well, it's real because it does affect, once again, if you have been in this situation the last 2 years, there are folks out there who are still not working. What happens with them? Just like those folks who went through the hurricane and those folks who went through earthquakes and all this other stuff that happened. It was not even 20 years ago, if I'm correct, to the date where there was a major tsunami. Even I'm forgetting. I believe everybody's gotten that. But the major tsunami that happened out, let's see here, in 2018. Tsunami, what was it? 20, it was late. Tsunami, no. Wait, was it 2 days? Yeah, like, remember when this happened? 7:59 a.m., 9 earthquake, one of the largest ever recorded. And now we forgot all about that. The deadliest recorded, yeah, and 230,000 lives. That's like a town, right? In a matter of hours. And it started with a 9.1 magnitude earthquake. I remember that. It was on Boxing Day, the Boxing Day tsunami. But now, today, even though all those lives have just been literally washed away, more than 100,000 men, women, and children. I remember when I saw it in the newspaper, it was like, they even, back then, at least back then, they showed the paper, they showed the pictures of these people. I wondered how they pulled that off, but they had all these, like, literally thousands of, you probably wouldn't find it now, but that's what did come up in the papers, right? Trees, cars, everything. And when that happened, That was, if anything, the omen for what we still see going on today, right? This was, so, and Thailand was next. But this was an Indonesia of tsunami of epic proportion. Out of all places, right? Indonesia. Nobody saw that. 2004, that was the year. 2004. Here we are, 2022. It's like 18 years ago already. And we forgot all about that. So pop culture and influences, pros and cons. Well, here's something positive to say. Scarlett Johansson and other celebrities raise voice against controversial gas pipeline. And we don't hear anything about the native, our Aboriginal nations out there, First Nations, make which to you out there. What is going on? We haven't heard from you, right? Just like our bros out in Ukraine, we're not hearing from you. I know right now there's a heavy thing, and look, at least some good things are happening, I guess, with activism and some actors, right? The petition organized by Indigenous Climate Action, signed by Mark Ruffalo, Leonardo DiCaprio, Tika Waititi, Scarlett Johansson, Jane Fonda, Robert Downey Jr., alongside many others, actors, artists, athletes, and musicians. It reads, we, the undersigned, demand that City National Bank's parent company, World Bank Canada, withdraw support from the Coastal Gas Link pipeline effective immediately. Uphold and affirm and respect the rights of Indigenous peoples. There's more that does read here, but I would prefer you go and look it up yourself, folks. I will just mention this here. It is critical that CNB and RBC not only respect the rights of Indigenous peoples, but adhere to policies and practices that ensure the free, prior, and informed consent (FPIC) of Indigenous peoples as defined in the United Nations Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous People. So UN DRIP. Can you just see that? UNDRIP, UN DRIP, under Article 32, Stop Funding Fossil Fuel Expansion. So it's about money. And Article 32. So what is Article 32? So Article 32 says and states, 1. Indigenous peoples have the right to determine and develop priorities and strategies for the development or use of their lands or territories and other resources. 2. States shall consult and cooperate in good faith with the indigenous peoples concerned through their own representative institutions in order to obtain their free and informed consent prior to the approval of any project affecting their lands or territories and other resources, particularly in connection with the development, utilization, or exploitation of mineral, water, or other resources. 3. States shall provide effective mechanisms for just and fair redress for any such activities, and appropriate measures shall be taken to mitigate adverse environmental, economic, social, cultural, or spiritual impact. And then it goes on, they have the right to determine, indigenous people have the right to determine their own identity or membership in accordance with their customs and tradition. That's in Article 33. So, this is what's out there, and at least they're pushing for that, because it looks like somehow there's going to be some discussion about getting oil out of here, right? That I predict that is probably going to be what's going on next week, because the prices are going up. But the First Nation issue here is still dire. They haven't had clean water, and I've been seeing some posts, and now once again that too is gone. Since we're on the topic of floods and water and as they say, climate change catastrophe, First Nation, over here, as we see on the list, begin filing claims for Canada's multi-billion-dollar water settlement. So it could provide compensation to 142,000 individuals. That's just as many people as we saw happen nearly 20 years ago. And 250 First Nations who were denied access to clean water. Like, how do you deny people that? Like, wow. For years, First Nations in Canada have denied access to clean drinking water. Many indigenous communities have to deal with brown, sludgy water and the destructive health impacts it brought. Some have spent years relying on boiled or bottled water. As of March 8, 2022, there were 23 short-term drinking water advisories. And yeah, advisories. Sorry, I'm just looking at my glasses here. There we go. 23 short-term drinking water advisories in place across the country that range from boil water advisories to do not consume notices. Now the Canadian government will have to pay for it. So they're saying a historic 8 billion Canadian settlement. That's 6.2 billion US approved by Canadian courts in December. So this was all triggered, and this was filed by the Tataskawik Cree Nation, Curve Lake First Nation, and Neskantaga First Nation. The settlement could provide compensation to more than 250 First Nations and roughly 142,000 individual Indigenous people. So they've had this go on, and an advisory, that's the word advisory, that has lasted at least 1 year between 1995 and 2001. Wow. And they are eligible to file claims online and receive compensation. So, small victories, but it's taken a while. Imagine getting advisories in place for how long? For something like 30 years. That's a generation. That's a full grown adult, somebody who's like near 40 now. The advisories, right? So it is something to think about. The Council of Canadians, right here, you could take action, and I believe this is a campaign actually, safe water for First Nations, and I would say not just First Nation, but everybody too, right? But because we are, like, let's say if you live in a city and it's not something that we take. Let's say we take it for granted, so we don't take it like, oh well, imagine if we didn't have water today and you can drink, we'd trip out, right? Because we buy water, but not everybody has money to buy water. So especially in the midst of all this business, we need drinking water. So in a country like Canada, this is like, how could it be? Instead, government has been promoting public-private partnerships, PS3s, as a solution. History has shown that PS3s cost more, they lead to privatization of water and loss of community control and jobs. So PS3s, let's see what that's open. Okay, so public-private partnerships, that's what they are. Between governments and the private sector to build public infrastructure, like roads, hospitals. So that's what that is. All right. So this is how many years? Once again, 20 years. So definitely you might want to read this, and hey, if you want to get active, definitely check out this site. Council of Canadians. Now 12:48 a.m. 2022, March 18th. We're almost wrapping up. So it's good to know that here today, now it's the 18th. Today is Goddess of Fertility Day. Celebrates fertility, life, and rebirth, and takes place a few days before the spring equinox each year. Fertility is the capability to produce offspring, and besides sexual behavior, it is contingent on a number of factors such as nutrition, culture, and economics. All right, so this is what's going on today and how we observe it. And of course, Easter will not be too far off, right? So it's interesting how this comes up in one of our holidays just before. So yeah, happy Goddess of Fertility Day. Let's see a little history here if you have. but you know spring is around. So let's meet a few of the fertility gods and goddesses. So there's quite a few. Let's see. Adioquio, Haitian Lord goddess of fertility in voodoo. Allah, the goddess of the Igbo people. She gives fertility to crops and to people. Alat, the Islam goddess of fertility. Anahita. Anahita is an Iranian goddess of fertility, healing and wisdom. Aphrodite, who hasn't heard her yet, Greek goddess of love, beauty, pleasure, and fertility. The full Monty, she's known in Turkey as Aphrodisias. And she has an archaeological site and a city. Bes, ancient Egyptian deity, along with sexuality, humor, and childbirth. He is not like a god, like the ones we know, but they consider him a demon. Not like Christian demons. A demon could be good or bad. He's depicted as a dwarf, bushy tail, and crown feathers. So you have a few others. Birahangalu, Camilla Roy, Cronius, Freya, Kakupeli, Lono, Maya, Shashashisti, Shastiti, Min, Ocean of the Yoruba, Sobek, Venus. She's the equivalent of Aphrodite. Not the same, but equivalent. And Soquiquistol. Yes, the Aztec goddess of fertility. Patroness of lovers and prostitutes. So, that's what happens with a day to celebrate. Speaking of, Elon Musk, artificial wombs and the impending shortage of Mars colonists. Synthetic wombs make having kids much faster, easier, cheaper, and more accessible. So yeah, this has been coming up, you know. And once again, this is not new. Like I started with the show. Hey, who are these? Well, a lot of the folks that you see making things happen in this world, you have to ask where they come from. You know, well, a lot of them are, since the beginning, like Cleopatra, they could be surrogate and thus right off the bat, they are different in many ways, right? Because we hear like a lot of the folks who did exist even during Egypt, and those times we're talking about putting bodies together and making creating a life, however it be, as we know, the secular part of what the truth is in resurrection, right? Because that's what they were. This thing about creating life by any means, even synthetically, has been around. And of course, we have people who live among us who probably lived in this world and left this world, who came into this world like that. And, might have been, as today we could probably call it some folks surrogate, right? And that's part of it too, because there is not as the natural procreation method of two souls coming together. So these guys were saying, rich men, see here, founder, musing. Okay, so this guy, Sahil Lavinia, musing over possible world population collapse and the desirability of creating synthetic wombs as a solution. Rich men suggest synthetic wombs should replace women, warns insider paper. Wise grumbles, cryptocurrency titans newly obsessed with artificial wombs. Wow, so billionaire crypto geeks say they want to replace human mothers with synthetic wombs. So they're probably going to have a new way of doing it, because I'm sure it's been. Don't forget, we had the first test tube baby in 1978. So this is not. I guess I'll have to do a whole. I've been really wanting to do actually, sort of a look-in study on how long we've been, say, producing people. And it probably says a lot more for, if those people who were produced Were they, say, disciplined or created to, like, hey, it goes down that rabbit hole. So those comments ginned up tempest of online moral outrage. All began when Musk tweeted he is worried that there may not be enough people wanting to move to Mars colonies due to a collapsing population here on Earth later. Yeah, so that's where that started. But this womb technology came up, but they've been doing it for a while, right? It could level the economic playing field between women and men and not minimizing the burdens of pregnancy. You see, this thing here, the burdens of pregnancy, this is going to, well, folks are trying to wipe that out. And if it is wiped out, and you know what, that thing can also go backfire because you'll always have people who will be like, well, no, they want to have the natural, but maybe by force, it'll be something, right? Even if you need to, both people need to work at a job, there are still, yeah, it goes back to some ethical issues, right? Safely gestating human babies in bottles raised. Okay, so let's say, yeah, so that's it. And it's called ectogenesis. Artificial womb technology could yield many benefits on Earth and provide a safe and sustainable way to populate an off-world human colony, argues Australian bioethicist Evie Kendall in her 2021 article, Ecogenesis for Space Exploration. Rather than use synthetic wombs to prevent population collapse here on Earth, like why bother here? Use them instead to populate Mars. Rocketing eggs and sperm to Mars has got to be a lot cheaper than transporting a full-grown human. Transporting fuel gear, that's funny. Yeah, gestating fetuses in a protected and controlled environment can help prevent damage caused by radiation exposure, natural nutritional deficits, or the impact of microgravity during pregnancy. So you want to turn them into Superman from the bag, like Clark Kent. Synthetic wombs and population. So you know how I take this? The way I read this is okay. So we get these synthetic wombs. We kind of wipe out the need to have physical even creation and birth, and we can make a new society, and we can implant, or we can, how we say, chip in, or maybe vibe in, or social media in, or influencer in behaviors and ways to make their life work and pay at the same time and be happy and have nothing. Okay, so that's what it is. So with a population, why, and how are you even going to sustain any, I don't even know, do we call them, yeah, you call them people, right? Any people born after that, population collapse, right? We should be investing in technology that makes having kids much faster, easier, cheaper, more accessible, synthetic wombs. Right? So let's take this word out. So this ectogenesis. Ectogenesis of human embryos and fetuses would require an artificial uterus. All right? A device that would allow extracorporeal, I like that word, extracorporeal pregnancy. That's a sweet, if there's a word like you can't be just corporal pregnancy, you have to be extracorporeal. Don't get sued. By growing a fetus outside the body of an organism that would normally carry the fetus to term. Boom. An artificial uterus would have to be supplied by nutrients and oxygen from some source to nurture it, as well as disposed naturally. So yeah, so this is all out there, right? And it's not a new thing, because a lot of folks are doing that too, right? And they have the IVF, in vitro, with surrogacy. So a lot of folks do it, and there are other folks, other well-known people. In fact, if anything, I'm gonna throw it out there. Maybe there's like more than 50%, maybe 30% of our influencers that go this route, right? But a lot of this is a fertility issue. That's the underline that nobody wants to talk about, right? I mean, if you wanted, I mean, if you're okay, surrogates carry the kid for you, but if you know, like have to do the in vitro thing, you're gonna have to do it. But even the ethics of that, how there's a whole thing to that, because let's say you and your husband or your wife, uh, in order to make that fetus or create that fetus, the reproductive fluids from man and the woman have to come together to make that, at least living in the living sense, right? So the thing with in vitro, sometimes it doesn't, somebody's got, let's say the male is not working, they can get that from some donation, and that's how that works. So a lot of folks, even and I'm mad because hey, if you reproductive organs and the body liquids that do work, which is natural in nature, that alone should do it. But I'm under the understanding that in order to have that is because something is not, um, how we say, unfortunately, not functioning like how it should. So yeah, so that's how a lot of these stars do it, and a lot of these folks out here. But there's so many, but there's lots of other intricate nuances of how this happens, right? So yeah, so these are some folks here. I'm just gonna scroll through quickly because we're almost wrapping up. There's still a couple of things I want to get in quickly. And of course, thanks. Give a thumbs up. Thank you for checking in. If you're not, check in next time. This broadcast will be edited and chopped up. So even if I'm going to run, let's say maybe an hour and a half, 2 hours, well, at least I can chop up instances of this, and that's why I'm doing a long stream right now. So, but just before we wrap up, thank you for checking in, and please give a thumbs up and share, share, share. We're going to get this together on the date. So, continuing, we have a few folks here. Amber Heard, yes. And Mr. Cooper, right? I didn't even know that. Congrats. I'm not gonna get into saying too much because yeah, once again, I'm not gonna try and politicize anything on this. I'm just showing you that it's been around for a while, right? See, it was unsafe. What's that? Okay. Yeah. And the reason why I'm just kind of so yeah, I'll just read one here. So this is one method here. It got a lot harder for gay guys to have kids, although we tried. Fredka joked during a 2020 appearance on Windy. He shared that two different women were involved. There was an egg donor, a wonderful woman, who was anonymous, he said. He took two of our best guys and implanted them into her eggs. Two different eggs. So that way, they don't know which twin is biologically theirs. Then they use a different woman to be surrogate. So you had an egg donor, and then you had a woman who took in the surrogate, and they're best guys. So that's one way how they make that happen, right? So yeah, it's not a new thing. So when it comes to with Mr. Musk saying that we need artificial wombs, well, I guess the idea to have these ready-made wombs is to make it easier and not put in, let's say, the work or the struggle. And I'm not discounting like women, going through labor. I've seen it, participated in the delivery. It's one of the most. If you haven't done it, you gotta do it. It's one of the most beautiful miracles that only you can say, "Wow, God is great," right? Because we do have a lot of folks out there who I do know that it's unfortunate they can't, but we also have something called belly bumps. Like now they have folks actually walking around with a simulated belly bump to feel how that feels. But it's not the same thing, I would say, for any woman who's, God bless you, capable to push a watermelon out through you after that stretch out. That is a miracle. So thumbs up to you women on Fertility Day 2022. God bless you, because you are the miracle. And of course, to the bros out there, because once again, it takes a couple of our guys to make this. But we have people who play around with those, playing around with our guys too much. So yeah. Well, they have 4 kids. Great. That's cool. They had twins in 2008. So they're, a lot of, yeah. Adoption was one, but it's complicated and can take a long time. Surrogacy was an intriguing and faster option. I thought I'm going to jump into this with no fear. So, yeah, and if some people have certain, when you go through treatments, medications. Yeah. Oh, I didn't know that. I don't know these actors here. Fast and Furious. This I've known, and yeah, and that's also tragic when folks go through such that, let's say, when they're having physical birth, um, to be careful on how they take care of themselves so they don't get an event where they could be injured and maybe, unfortunately, go through what they call a miscarriage, right? So there you go. That's our folks who have brought many people in the world. And hey, maybe, and once again, we don't know, they are also the same, right? So food for thought. Moving on that, of course. Now, these are some of the meanings behind it. Surrogacy involves a woman agreeing to carry a baby for someone else. After the baby is born, the birth mother gives custody and guardianship to the intended parent or parents. Okay. We also have altruistic, non-commercial surrogacy. The birth mother does not receive any payment. This is allowed in Australia. Traditional surrogate mother provides her own egg, which is inseminated with the commissioning father's sperm. Since the baby is biologically the surrogate mother's own child, there may be future issues concerning the child's future right to information about her identity. I always wonder about that, because when you think, I mean, I'm just asking this question: do folks that go that route, even though they genuinely love those children, I know, is it really fair not to tell them where they came from? Especially now that it's been going on forever. I mean, do the kids know? Well, yeah, you came here via surrogate, okay. And what about maybe if maybe there've been other generations that we never heard? That's my question. I mean, if it comes out now, or does it ever come out, right? Because obviously you see there's some laws here that says it could be different. So commercial surrogacy, this involves a birth mother receiving payment or material benefit. It's banned in Australia. It's not legal to pay a third party to arrange surrogacy. Yeah, I would imagine. And assisted reproduction. Surrogacy might include assisted reproduction treatments such as IVF, in vitro, surrogate mother's own eggs, a donor's eggs, intended mother's eggs, intended father's sperm, and donor sperm. Regulating it. So yeah, that's before conception. That's legal stuff. So if somebody wants to go that route, this is, I guess, one good way to inquire how to emotionally transfer a baby born via surrogacy, right? An abrupt transfer from surrogate to intended parents can be a shock. So this is a nice article here written to check out on surrogate.com. Right? In psychology, this bond is called attachment, and research suggests that the bonds of attachment begin to form even before the baby is born. The baby gets to know its mother for 9 months before birth through the sound of her voice, and in turn, she gets to know her baby through kicks and flutters. Right? That's the physical. That's with the baby in you. The theory of prenatal attachment states that these bonding experiences motivate good health practices during pregnancy, prepare the mother for parenthood, and help promote continued bonding after the birth. But what happens in surrogacy when parents and the baby don't get to bond during the pregnancy? When a baby is born via surrogacy, an emotional transfer needs to take place from the surrogate family to the intended parents. This emotional transfer allows the baby to begin bonding with his or her parents and vice versa. So it's preparing for emotional transfer, grieve your losses, be involved in the pregnancy. Yeah, that would make sense. Talk to your baby. Keen sense of smell and hearing. So those senses also, right? You're basically, because I would imagine if you have a child in you, right, and that child comes out, because of the sharing of that body and in creation, things like smell and touch, just like breastfeeding, those are natural instincts. So even to have that, I guess, is pretty different. I'm only talking like straight from the womb. I'm not saying this is like maybe for some kids and maybe 5, but I'm talking straight from the senses, right? The more you can talk to the baby either in person or through recorded tapes, the more familiar your baby will become with you and your family. Recording yourself sending. So provide a transitional item. Emotional transfer at the hospital. Confirm the baby's senses. Yeah, once again, that it's that you have a parent and you can smell the parent and you're like, yeah, that smells like your mom and your dad, right? I mean, I'm of course, this could be the case different when somebody is adopted. I'm not saying, orphans, for example, yeah, when they're taken in, right? This is also, I would imagine, a type of procedure. And maybe some of this could actually does cross over to what it is to adopt. But maybe adoption is way more different also because of the circumstances that that child is coming from. It's not necessarily straight from birth and into adoption, even though there is a lot of that. And that also coincides to surrogacy. So following the emotional transfer, staying in contact with the surrogate. Within a couple of weeks, be patient, final thoughts. So yeah, so that's getting emotional. 1:14 a.m. 2022, March 18th. The first artificial womb for humans. So when was this? When did this come out? This came out 16th of October, 2019. Scientists in the Netherlands say they are within 10 years of developing an artificial womb that could save the lives of premature babies. That's the recent news. But also ethical questions once again. So if they say this is what they're looking at doing, it means they've done it. Lesson learned. Next, Chinese scientists create AI nanny to look after embryos in artificial womb. AI nanny. So if you could imagine how that goes, right? To monitor and take care of the embryos as they grow into fetuses in the lab. It's always legal and ethical concerns. Well, because it's a machine, right? And digital machine on top of that. So putting in those algorithms, I don't know. Like if a baby hears music in a mother's belly, that child can move. Like with my friend, uh, so I had a friend who was pregnant, and the child will move when let's say someone would come through the door, or somebody would, like the child would know so that's a real thing. So I wonder, like, well, will the kid know? It's like, this robot bot telling me something. That's pretty kind of nefarious there, because that's technocracy playing with the senses, right? Next, ooh, March 16th, 2022, hot off the press, UBC scientists discover how to print 3D print testicular cells. In a pair of world first, UBC scientists have 3D printed human testicular cells and identified promising early signs of sperm producing capabilities. So this is probably, once again, I was saying about the solutions for fertility. So one day this could offer a solution for people living with presently untreatable forms of male fertility. And that's something very interesting. In the 90s, let's say after all this sexual revolution, the Viagra thing started. Now I'm sure it was around a little before that in other forms, in other even narcotics. But in the 90s, when Viagra came out, that was for those boomers, right? That was the first generation to get into that. And of course, a few, the older ones. But when you heard of this stuff come out like Viagra and all of this stuff, it makes you wonder if this had something to do with it, right? Because maybe there's a lot of untreatable, and where is this, male infertility coming from, right? So everybody's under attack, man. So they say we're 3D printing these cells into a very specific structure that mimics human anatomy, which we think is our best shot at stimulating sperm production. If successful, this could open the door for new fertility treatments for couples who currently have no option. Okay, so within human testicle, sperm is produced by tiny tubes known as seminiferous tubules. In the most severe form of male infertility, known as non-obstructive azoospermia (NOA), no sperm is found in ejaculate due to diminished sperm production within these structures. So they can, by performing surgery to find extremely rare sperm. Ooh, and it's only successful about half the time. I'm like, how do you find, like, fortunately, I mean, isn't there, like, I don't know, if you really want to find that stuff, I mean, if you can't shake it out, I mean, figure it out, right? Because you can't find. So for the recent study, the researchers performed a biopsy to collect stem cells from the testicles of a patient living with NOA. The cells were then grown, because that's how they are. You can clone and do the rest and all of that, right? The cells were then grown and 3D printed onto a petri dish into a hollow tubular structure that resembles the sperm-producing seminiferous tubules. 12 days after printing, the team found, 12 days, right? The team found that the cells had survived Not only that, they had matured into several of the specialized cells involved in sperm production and were showing a significant improvement in spermatogonal, no, spermatogonial stem cell maintenance, both early signs of sperm producing capabilities. The results of the study were recently published in Fertility and Sterility Science. So it's a, okay, so the team is now working to coach, right? Coach your system, coach your body, the printed cells into producing sperm. To do this, they'll expose the cells to different nutrients and if they can get the cells to produce sperms, those sperms could potentially be used to fertilize an egg. So I guess at the end of the day, what I'm reading here is that with once again with the growth of these cells, specialized cells involved in producing, so that's like a little machine or little machine in another little machine and to produce that, maybe that will produce spermatozoa. So, but that is a liquid material that has, I believe, a force of life in its, because once it is inseminated and gets with the egg, what is it, billions of sperm die. So even if you're saying you're trying to get that one, and you're trying to create many others, I don't know, to be continued. Because it's art, this is going to be synthetic sperm, right? At the end of the day, or is it, um, yeah, I'll just leave it right there. So that's coming up as we're almost wrapping up. 1:21 a.m. 2022, March 18th, and since we were covering a lot of the engineering by, once again, the folks that brought to you by, and the weather today influence a lot of the cultures that we have. Look at all these subcultures we've had, right? The beat generation. And some of these are like, look at that, cocaine dependence, neurological. I didn't even know it was a subculture, but these are all subcultures by design, is the point, right? Yeah, emo, e-boy, like it's already like who's an emo now, right? They're all like freaking middle agers, right? They probably have kids of their own. It's a freak scene. So this is how much I know it doesn't end. It goes on and on and on, right? It is. And not only like you saw those meetings, it also goes by timeline. Thus, the people who like wait and they say, well, let's wait to make a new thing. Yeah, look at that. The fin de siècle, the Belle Époque was the era, the Bloomsbury Group, Associate English Writers, Intellectuals. It's always that, right? These folks, and they create movements, little subcultures, right? World War One, 1914 to 18, hairstyles changed. Wartime trenches were infested with lice and fleas, so soldiers were forced to shave their heads. So that whole trench thing, that was like a real big new thing, right? Like in the 20th century, with the type of mechanics we have to dig that, even though you have a lot of them doing it like straight up with shovel, that was still new military methods, not like previous wars, right? Because every new war, they have to have new methods. It's like a football game almost. You got to have a play, right? So consequently, men with short hair appeared to have been at the front in war, while men with longer hair might have been thought of as pacifists and cowards. So it's interesting. So people probably had long hair then up until when the war started. Food for thought, right? Because it comes and goes, that short hair business. Because and even back then, yeah, you see a lot of old pictures in the 18th century. Men had like long beards, long hair. So interesting. Some artists managed to avoid the war by sitting it out in neutral Switzerland. A group of artists in Zurich invented Dadaism. So arts were invented, right? Or different we call movements, avant-garde movements, different movements. Dadaism, thisism, Van Gogh, art movement. Yeah. So this was in the beginning of the 20th century, and then into the 20s, American jazz music, the bros. Not like they probably weren't involved in all of that prior to that. Flappers, swing kids. Then you had Prohibition, the 30s, the German nudist movement, but was suppressed during the Gleichen Schalung. Yeah. Surrealism was attempting to shock the world with their games and bizarre behavior. So the art world of surrealism, which is in a weird way kind of a slightly propagandish, if you look at the early aftermath of World War One, in which artists depicted unnerving theological scenes and developed techniques to allow the unconscious mind to express itself. 1930s. Surrealists were at one and the same time a serious art movement and a parody of other art forms and political movements developed by this guy, André Robert Breton, the Surrealist Manifesto of 1924. So that looks pretty modern for 1928, a time traveler. Look at that. 1924, he busting like, yeah, look at that tie. People wasn't busting tie like that in 24. They were still like wearing bow tie, sunglasses. Oh, anyway. So that says a lot. So the Great Depression, that was like the famous pictures, how they always get in camera. Picture, right? And it caused what we know, poverty, the Great Depression, the malaise, consequent malaise among adolescents that found its expression in urban youth gangs, the so-called dead-end kids. The dead-end kid phenomenon was fictionalized on the stage. Dead-end kids, East Side kids, little tough guys. So that, all that dirty 30s gangster stuff, that's where it came from, right? And anybody who did come into, I guess, Western culture or immigrated, they saw this in the movies and all of that. But the Kid Gang comic book, stories of Jack Kirby, very well known, right? The comic book comes out of that whole era. Boy Commandos, right off the bat. Joe Simon, Jack Kirby, I'm sure you know. An international cast of young boys fighting Nazis, or in their own parlance, the Nazis. So it's fictional organization from DC Comics first appearing in Detective Comics. In the Dust Bowl. If you ever hear about the 1930s, call it the Dust Bowl, right? So the 1940s. So as you see, a lot of this brings us up even to the best one that we know. A new identity emerged for youth subculture. And this is the 1950s, the teenager, right? Teenager, adolescence transition. But they actually turned it into that whole marketing, jazz culture, turned into rhythm blues, rock and roll. And thus all of that came into today. Moral panics surrounding the advent of the teenager. The United States Senate Subcommittee on Juvenile Delinquency, established in the United States Senate in 1953, to investigate the problem of juvenile delinquency, which was a new problem, right? Street violence was the greaser. Learned in the 50s, 60s. And it was embraced by a certain ethnic group, eh? A lot of people know it. A working class and the biker subculture. So they got it pretty all here, you know, all this business here about how the movie and subculture and how they parody stuff. You got Trouble, and then the 60s with the hippie movement, the freaks, the beatniks. Once again, bikers. And the freak scene. It was an originally a component of the Bohemian subculture, which began in California in the mid 1960s, post-hippie pre-punk period. And Rude Boy. So all these little things always have these little, you know, some type of upsetism. Rude Boy. Rock steady. So then you had, yeah, this business. And look at that, and the people of the Beat generation, right? So they got into their middle age up until the 70s and so on. And once again, you see a lot of freaks and geeks and counterculture. And the 80s comes into the technical thing and the next. So yeah, we have a lot of subcultures. Myself being Generation X, right? In the late 80s. And then let's see what they predict for the 20th. So we call them echo boomers, which probably is, I would say, a very accurate description of what's happening today. Echo boomers, for real, because they are echoing like, let's say, how they were like children back then. So it's something to think about post-hardcore. But nothing in the future. Look at this. The 2010s has seen the rise of subcultures that exist largely or entirely online, as divergent as vaporwave, ASMR, UK drill, and makeup tutorials. So that's where we are today. Moving on and wrapping up. What's left is, once again, check this out. Make sure you advocate. If you could do something today, it's better than everything. What we say about making and designing bodies and all of that, I'll just read a couple of these because I found some scriptures here, you know, very helpful in giving us a chance to, you know, get away from all the news and forget about what is always shoved down our throats to believe. Once again, from people or folks that come into existence and we don't know how, but they are spirited in and they grow up and, hey, they are who they are, right? And they dictate who we should be and how the world should be and how we should live and who should live and nah. You gotta have some fight back. Right? No one should be forced to hate themselves because of how they look, but that comes from what we know as this popular culture angle, right? Anything that comes with that whole, you know, like makeup artist. Hey, yeah. So that's a whole generation of young people now that are going to go up to that. Forget about Gen Y and Gen X and Z. Anybody who's now part of this boomerang, you know, generation, echo boomer, you're in, you know, you're done, you're done. But you can learn if you learn to open your mind a bit more, right? That's what I'm trying to do here and share this information in this blog. 1 Corinthians 15:38-39. But God gives it a body as he has chosen. and to each kind of seed its own body. Each kind of seed its own body. For not all flesh is the same, but there's one kind for humans, another for animals, another for birds, and another for fish. Okay, Ecclesiastes 7:13. Consider the work of God. Who can make straight what He has made crooked? This is one of my favorites here. Psalm 139, 13, 16. And this one, this is one of those for when you're really feeling down. I know whenever, if I was ever down, or depressed or whatnot, or even uncertain about what's going to happen for the next day, this is probably one of the, strongest prayer or, prayer psalms that speaks about what's happening today and how we should at least try not to eliminate, but give appreciation that human are, as humans, where we exist and we are created to bring life into the world. That's part of it, right? Even though we're being told that with only, let's say, someone with 30 good years, no, in your 30 years, you have to get out there and work and make millions. And hey, sure. But this stuff is all within a program that started at least 70 years ago, right? So in Psalm 139, 13, 16, for you formed my inward parts. You knitted me together in my mother's womb. I praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. So you knitted me together in my mother's womb. It's almost like, yeah, like when the liquids get together, right? And you know each other, and I'm sure even those liquids know each other when you're sharing those liquids, right? Because there's that, I mean, I'm being, sort of analytical here, but I'm just saying when two people get together, even though they are in love or not in love, this happens. This could happen if someone gets pregnant. So you're knitted together by those liquids, and it's amazing because out of how many billions of cells, in this case we say spermatozoid, one lives to make that one egg. So, for you formed me, for you formed my inward part. So even being formed from that microscopic way, you are being created still and growing inside someone's body that was made to take care of that. So your inward parts are being formed from inside someone living. For you formed my inward parts, you knitted me together in my mother's womb. I praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. So fearfully and wonderfully. And you probably have some good, and you probably got some bad ways. I'm just guessing, but fearfully, oof, because you might not be made, and you might not be made wonderful. Wonderful are your works, my soul knows it very well, and that's true. Because if you feel your soul, at least if you're able to get around and on the average keep well, your soul is well. My frame was not hidden from you. So God probably knew, well, not probably, God knew who you were going to be and how you were going to look. My frame was not hidden from you when I was being made in secret. That's deep. When you were being made, yeah. So God already, knew, like all-knowing, knows that, hey, you're going to come out like this, you're going to be like this. And even when you were being created, that's one of those things you hear when people go through a life-death experience. They'll often say, you can see when they were babies first or something, and I always find that's amazing because maybe we don't even hear the rest of it. Maybe they're probably seeing them being made in secret. You know what I'm saying? Not like in a weird way, in a creepy way, but like in a spiritual sense, right? When you're in that realm. Because you always say, yeah, they don't even recognize themselves. They say, oh, they saw this baby crying and they're like, they realize it's them, right? So I think that's pretty dynamic and pretty intense that God sees all. When I was being made in secret, don't matter what you're doing, God knows because He makes that gem intricately woven in the depths of the earth, intricately woven in spirit and sense, right? Intricately. Every vein, every bone, every gristle, every liquid, all of that. And it's made also in part of what, hey, our atmosphere too helps us, I'm sure. The oxygen, the food we eat. So your eyes saw my unformed substance. In your book were written, every one of them, the days that were formed for me, when as yet there was none of them. So that's pretty big. I would just say, thank you, Lord, for at least getting me through another day, another week, another month, another year, so far. And I pray for the world out there that we get it right at some point, even though we're going to make a lot of mistakes learning and trying to get it right. And I pray for all the kids out there who are probably starving or alone, who are abandoned, who have no family, who might even though they might be orphaned and or maybe adopted in situations that could be very dangerous to them, or and being brought into this world in a very cold and non-physical substance and maybe artificial way coming into this world. I pray that, hey, those folks can hopefully see a light, and if you're alive and you're walking, you gotta have some spirit in you. And maybe that spirit might not be a positive one. Either way, if you come into this world as a child, we know you're innocent. But how you're brought up and raised up, whether it be in a synthetic way, if you're born even synthetically, the fact that you can speak, think, breathe says that you have something more in you that's just working with blood pumping and veins. They can't even still figure out the brain. Right? Scientists, even though we make great strides, I believe a lot of those great strides are from books that have already existed in the past. So I pray, Lord, that those folks out there who are growing up or who have grown up and existed in this synthetic, what is a synthetic existence, or what they believe is a synthetic body. Because even then, we can't call it that because you made them. So even if they want to come out and say, well, they were born this way or that way, if they come out alive, it's only a miracle through you, not people who use synthetic materials to make that happen. If you hear what I'm saying, Lord. So I pray that all of those children and all those who exist among us, that you could look out for them and help them and let them see and help them to make peace with us. Because I know a lot of them out there are probably very upset, and maybe this is part of the, some of them are, maybe there's a sort of a life end game. Maybe some are on their way out and they're like, huh, all these years, all these decades, they thought they were nobody in the sense that they were taught this. This was, pounded into their head literally, right? And you may be thrown an extra shock and be told that you didn't exist and your only existence is because you came in a bottle, meaning you came into this world in the bottle. That could probably turn someone cold off to even wanting to believe in a God and believe in existence, because you're just running and going on your physical. Your mind is not the same like how your brain is thinking to eat, to just get by and survive every day. So I pray that those folks, because I'm sure, if anything, I'm sure as we all watch what we see out there, and and most of us who've been around long enough to see how things are going down and what is out there, it's time to realize that we're not alone. Instead of thinking, oh, we have aliens out there. It's not that we have aliens. Maybe those folks who are not coming into this world, and as what we know was before the science, well, before it was exploited as the science in a natural way versus the segregate way. Maybe there is something more to how the rearing goes. Not to say that even, I'm sure, just like like we were reading, in many situations where children are born naturally. That's not to discount that that crime doesn't happen either, because a lot of folks do bring in, like some surrogates that are legal. They bring in children in this world as a as a a mean of work, or a means of I don't know if I could say survival, uh, but as a means of their existence, right? As they would say, breed. But all of this can only happen by the grace of God, right? So I just once again pray that these folks find it in their hearts, man, because even if you were born feeling that you don't have no heart and there's no such heart that exists, I feel that you're more than just the physical, that heart. You cry when you're hurt. You cry for people that you lose. You can laugh at a joke. It's not 24 and 24 negativity all day, every day, even though there are people that do exist. And once again, it goes back to you can either beat them or join them. Who do you want to beat and join? Do you want to beat and join the devil, or you want to beat and join eternal life? Yeah, I'm just ranting, but we are wrapping up. I just wanted to share that thought because, yeah, it's real. We are, and it's not new. It's real and it's not new. So everyone you probably see out there might be, maybe, who knows? Who knows? Who knows? Maybe the people who run the worlds, maybe they're right, but we won't call them alien. That we will not do, and we will not call them wizards. But they are people, and I'm sure a lot of these people, these folks, will want to come out and maybe, let us know what time it is, what you think, right? So yeah, leave your comment. One more time. For you formed my inward parts. You knitted me together in my mother's womb. I praise you, for I'm fearfully and wonderfully made. Wonderful are your works. My soul knows it very well. My frame was not hidden from you when I was being made in secret, intricately woven in the depths of the earth. Your eyes saw my unformed substance in your book were written, every one of them, the days that were formed for me, when as yet there was none of them. So, with that, everyone, I'm gonna wrap things up. Once again, you can come and check me out on Bantu, which is where I'll be also editing up clips of this broadcast. And yeah, you can also get me on Patreon, brought to you by. And that way, I could always use a coffee, as we do say. So please, by all means, come on by. Right? So this is the Eurox. We're wrapping up another broadcast. I'm gonna let it end with this guy and let you all ponder.
The population. Now, why go through this background? Well, if you look at what also was going on in that period, in 1971, because of the dollar crisis, which was provoked by the British, It actually started with the pound crisis in 1968. The dollar crisis was used as an excuse to take the dollar off the gold standard as a gold reserve and to set up the floating exchange rate, which was used by people like George Soros and speculators to create a whole new economy against the idea of an economy of physical production in favor of an idea of bubbles and speculation. That has gone increasingly bad over the last 50 years. We had a series of bubbles and pops of those bubbles, the 1987 stock market crash, the 1997 Asia market crash, the 98 Russian bond crash, the 2000 dot-com bubble crash, the 2007, 2008 crash, and so on, to the point that today we're facing another global financial crisis. Now, if you put together the attempt to use geopolitics to divide countries, to use identity politics to divide people within countries against each other, and the neoliberal policy which says you can't trust government, everything must be done on an individual basis, free the individual from regulation. What you've created is a perfect storm for the crises we face today. Now, just in terms of this merger of neoliberalism and geopolitics, let me refer to a couple of events that are sort of examples of this kind of merger. First, you had at Jackson Hole, Wyoming, in August 2019, a conference presided over by the Federal Reserve. It's their annual retreat. But at this conference, they had Larry Fink from BlackRock. They had Mark Carney, the former governor of the Bank of England, Sir Michael Bloomberg, and a number of others who presented an idea which they called the financial regime change.
Be careful out there. That arm is unstable. Not sure how long it's going to hold. There's warning lights everywhere. Abort! Abort! We've lost comm.